Today, we are going to talk about the words die, dead, and death, plus some other expressions that you can use instead of these. Then, we're going to talk about some other words related to death, such as coffin, funeral, gravestone, etc. And finally, we're going to talk about some things that you can say to someone who has recently lost a loved one. Okay, so let's start with die, dead, death. The basic difference is that die is a verb, death is a noun, and dead is an adjective. Here are some examples of how we might use these words. He died 3 days ago. She's going to die soon. He died in a car accident. Many people die from cancer. Also, we are supposed to use die of with a direct cause and die from with an indirect cause. But this really isn't very important, and I don't want you to worry about it today. Dead is the opposite of alive. She is dead. She is not alive anymore. He has been dead for 7 years. The police discovered a dead body. Zombies are walking dead people. We thought he would be dead by now, but he's still alive. Death is basically the opposite of life, or the opposite of birth. Many people don't like to talk about death. He was shot to death by the police. She had no food and starved to death. His death was a surprise to all of us. Are you afraid of death? Die, dead, and death are all very useful words, and they are not rude. However, in some situations, people try not to use these words because death can be a very sensitive topic, and sometimes we try to use softer words. There are a lot of expressions, idioms, and slang terms that we can use to talk about death. But I'm not going to teach you a lot of them. And this is for the same reason that I don't usually teach a lot of slang or a lot of idioms for anything. As an English learner, you don't have enough experience with the language to really understand how these expressions make people feel, when it's appropriate to use them, and when it's inappropriate to use them. So I'm just going to teach you the ones that are the most common and the most appropriate. First, we have pass or pass away. They both just mean die. However, they sound a bit softer. However, an important thing to remember here is that we don't say someone is passed away, because just like die, pass is a verb, not an adjective. So we don't usually use this to say someone is dead. We use it more to tell a story about someone dying. For example, she passed away a few days ago. He passed away 1 week after the accident. I was very sad to learn that she had passed away. If you just want to say that someone is dead, you wouldn't usually use pass away, unless it happened very recently. For example, someone might call you and say something like, "Mike, I'm sorry, I need to tell you, Steve has just passed away." In that situation, it works. But usually, when we just want to say that someone is dead, that's what we say. We just say, someone is dead. Or we might use no longer living, or not with us anymore. For example, my grandparents are no longer living, or Aunt Sarah is not with us anymore. However, I prefer to use no longer living, because if you use not with us anymore, there's always a possibility that the other person might not understand, and they might ask, "Oh, really? Where has she gone?" And a lot of English learners want to use the word gone to talk about death, but it's actually not a word that we use very often in normal conversations. Sometimes we do use the adjective gone to talk about death, but we mostly use it when giving someone news about someone dying, especially if it has just happened. For example, a doctor might say, "I'm sorry, he's gone. There was nothing I could do to save him," when talking to the family of a patient. Or if you are trying to save the life of someone who is dying, you might say, "He's gone," when you notice that they have died. And there is also the word deceased, which is basically just a formal way to say dead, and you'll probably see this mostly just in documents. And when someone dies of a serious illness, or a serious injury, or they died during surgery, we often say they didn't make it. To make it means to survive, to not die. So to not make it means that they did not survive. They died. So a surgeon might say something like, "I'm so sorry, she didn't make it," if their patient died during surgery. Or maybe you say to someone, "The paramedics tried to save him, but his injuries were too severe. He didn't make it." And the last normal one that I want to give you is to lose your life. This one is common, but it's a bit formal, and it's mostly used for very tragic, very dramatic situations. For example, many men and women have lost their lives in this war. Each year, many people lose their lives as a result of drinking and driving. Finally, two informal expressions that I think you should know are to kick the bucket and to croak. These both just mean to die. And again, these two expressions are informal and not polite, so I don't recommend using them. I just want you to know them because you might hear them used sometimes by native speakers in movies or on TV. Okay, and now we're going to look at some other words related to death. First, we've got funeral. A funeral is basically an event or a ceremony that you have when someone dies, and they can be very different in different cultures. In the United States, we also have something called a wake. A wake is basically a smaller event a few days before the funeral. Friends and family come to basically say goodbye to the person who has died. In some cultures, the bodies of people who have died are either cremated and or buried. To bury a body means to put it in the earth and cover it with dirt. To cremate a body basically means to burn it. When a body is buried, it is usually put in a box first. That box is usually called a casket or a coffin. Caskets and coffins are pretty similar, but the main difference is just that a casket has 4 sides and a coffin has 6 sides. After a body has been cremated, you have ashes. Ashes are then sometimes put in a special container called an urn. The spot where you bury a body, or ashes, is called a grave. The concrete or stone object that is often put on top of a grave can be called a headstone, a tombstone, or a gravestone. The large area that has many graves is called either a graveyard or a cemetery. The main difference between a graveyard and a cemetery is that a graveyard is usually located on the property of a church. However, many people use these words interchangeably. It doesn't really matter which one you use. And finally, things that we can say to someone who has recently lost a loved one. If you are on social media and you just want to leave a quick message on this person's Facebook or something, here are 3 things that you can write. I'm so sorry for your loss. My sincere condolences. We will be keeping your family in our thoughts, or in our prayers. If you are actually talking to someone in person, and this is someone who you know pretty well, you want to say something a little bit more personal. The first thing that I recommend is to talk about the person who has died. Be honest. Tell a story about your relationship with them. You might say something like, "He was such a good friend of mine. I'm going to miss him so much. I remember the time that we..." And then tell a nice story that shows that you have good memories of that person. Or you could say something like, "I don't really know what to say. I'm just so sorry for your loss, and I want you to know I'm always here if you want someone to talk to." So yeah, that's all for today. Thank you for watching.